What is going on, everybody? How you all doing out there? I hope this video is finding you well. Welcome or welcome back to Get Right On In. My name is Andrew, for those of you who do not know, and today I am just going to be talking about the very Stephen King-filled August that I just had with my little August reading wrap-up. Not gonna waste too much time on the introduction today. With all that now out of the way, without further ado, let's get right on in. Okay, so the first book that I read this month was called The Healing Power of the Mind, which is about simple meditation tricks just to help you out, because for those of you who may or may not know, I have had a little bit of mental struggles over the last few months. I was officially diagnosed with depression, and I am working on getting through that for myself. So I'm trying to read some more little self-help books, especially while I'm getting the help that I need to move forward, to be a more healthy, mindful person. I did end up giving this book a 4 out of 5. It was definitely very interesting. I listened to it on audio, and I can take some of the techniques that I have learned and move forward to hopefully implement them into my life and continue working on being the best version of myself that I can be. The next book that I read this month was The Long Walk, which is Stephen King but writing as Richard Bachman. I also gave this book a 4 out of 5. I listened to it while I was on a very long drive up to Fresno to get my stuff, and there was a lot of this book that was very intense, to be quite honest with you. I mean, mostly it's all in the title. It's just about a very long walk, but there's some very Hunger Games-y elements going on. I mean, it's Stephen King. People definitely don't survive in this book, and it's just very, I don't know, it's just interesting. All these people just sign up to do this long walk where they can't walk less than 0.4 miles per hour, and if they do, they get a few warnings, and if they continue to walk slower than what they're supposed to, they wind up dead. Very interesting book, especially because it was one of his first ones. I think that someone said that this was actually the first book that he ever wrote, even though it wasn't the first one that he published. So I don't know, good job to him for that. It was definitely a very interesting book. Very quick read, probably not necessarily one I would read again, but since most of what I did this month was on audio, I would always be open to actually reading the physical book, especially as an immersion read, especially because I found out that Scribd has like every Stephen King book imaginable, so I don't know. But this one was a 4 out of 5 for me. It was very enjoyable, and if you haven't read it and you're a fan of Stephen King, then you totally should. The next Stephen King book that I finished this month was his new one, Billy Summers, which I ended up giving a 4.5 out of 5. I really enjoyed this book a lot. It's about an assassin who's basically on his last little assassination, but he's on this journey of redemption as well. There are kind of two storylines going on in this book, and I liked the second half storyline much more than I liked the first half, but in general, this was just a very solid book, I thought. It's more of a thriller. It's not necessarily like the Stephen King horror-based, like what I just said a minute ago about The Long Walk. Just a very straightforward crime thriller, pretty much is what it is, but I enjoyed this one a lot, and it seems like a lot of other people did as well. And this was the book that made me realize that there's like all of the Stephen King books on Scribd. Even though I had been listening to The Dark Tower, I didn't really realize how many Stephen King books were actually available by audio. So I'm glad that I was able to listen to this one, because I'm trying to read basically all of his books, and I always oscillate between like publication order and trying to keep up with the new ones, and then also just reading the ones that I want to read in general. So I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to be on board with this one pretty much as it came out, so it's just one more that I'm not behind on. The next book that I read this month was The Sugar Season by Douglas Wynot, which I ended up giving like a 3 out of 5. I read this book, so it's actually part of Kim from Bookmarks and Breadsticks, is part of her little Read It and Eat subscription for the fall box that's coming. That's all about maple syrup, and it was a good book, and I learned a lot for sure. I just felt like it was dragging out a little bit, so I don't know, I had a hard time like really getting into it. It was almost like, I mean, it's like 300 pages, but by about 100 pages in, I was like, I feel like I know everything that I need to know for this book, and and I just didn't really feel like it needed to be as long as it was. But I don't know, it wasn't a horrible book, and I definitely learned a lot. I have a big appreciation for maple syrup and the making of maple syrup, especially after this, because there is so much that goes into the production of maple syrup, from tapping the trees to boiling the sap to the mass production, which was interesting to read about just because in the past I have actually been present for a wine bottling day, so I have seen some mass production in action, and it actually is so much work that is put into this. So I have an appreciation for the farmers who do all of the maple syrup, and it was a good book for learning about all of that. I just felt like it was dragging on a little bit too long, so I ultimately just got a 3 out of 5 for me. But I am glad that I learned what I learned out of this, because the Read It and Eat subscription box that this comes with does have some maple syrup and some pancakes that come with it for the food portion. And learning what I learned, I just had so much more appreciation whenever I was putting that syrup on my pancakes for my breakfast. So I don't know, this was definitely interesting, and if you do have Kim's Read It and Eat subscription box, then I don't think you'll be disappointed, but it's just not going to be one that I ever really go back and read again. Whereas like the Sweet Spot, the ice cream one that was for her summer read, I potentially would read again. But yeah, so I learned a lot about maple syrup, and if you're curious about how maple syrup works, this is definitely going to be the book for you. The next book that I finished this month was The Dark Tower by Stephen King, and now that I have all of my books back, I finally have my books back for this Dark Tower. I'm so excited. I listened to the entire series on audio between May to August because I was trying to catch up with Leslie over at the Nerdy Narrative because I wanted to be there as she finished this out, and I'm so glad that I did. It was the 3rd time that I went through the series, just the 1st time that I was on audio only, but now that I have my books back, maybe I will do an immersion read in the future. But I love this series, I love this book, I love it all so much. I like, if I had one series that I could choose to go back and read again for the first time, it would definitely be this one, because it was just so mind-blowing. I have only good things to say about the series as a whole, even though I do struggle a little bit with the gunslinger and getting into the series. It just, once the series kicks off in the 2nd book, it just does not slow down from there. So I am happy that I finished it for a 3rd time. I don't usually reread books. I'm not really a huge rereader, but this series is one that I will go back to again and again and again for the rest of my life. And I'm just so happy now that I'm finally reunited with the physical books, because it just feels so nice to have it holding in my hand. But yeah, so this was the next one that I finished up, and Leslie finished it up as well, and it seemed like she really enjoyed it. So I'm happy that I was able to be there for her as she finished her first venture into the Dark Tower, and I cannot wait until she goes back to reread it to hear her thoughts as she picks up on all of the things she didn't know about before. The next Stephen King book that I finished this month was Christine, which I ultimately gave about a 3.5 out of 5. I liked it, but I didn't at the same time. I think with this one, part of what it was that I was actually having a hard time connecting to the audio. So this would be one that I would definitely consider rereading in physical form or as an immersion read in the future. But for now, I mean, it was good. The character work is really good, which is something that Stephen King is really known for. I really do like character-driven novels, so all of the characters were really well written, and I get it with like the killer car thing being a scary concept. I have not seen the movie, so I can't really do a little comparison for that, but maybe I will, because I'll start out my book to movie comparisons again. But I don't know, yeah, this one just kind of fell a little bit flat to me, just considering like the cult around it, I guess. Like Christine is one of his more known books, I would say, like one that I knew of going into it at least. So I don't know, I was a little bit let down, but like I said, I also think I was just struggling a little bit to connect with the audio for this book. So I would give it another go if I ever had an opportunity, but it's also not one that I'm like running out to try to read again, just because I'm like, alright, been there, done that. we're gonna move on from here. So I don't know, just kind of middle of the road for me. Definitely not one of my top 10 Stephen King favorites, maybe not even my top 20, but I've only read 25 or so of his books, so I can't really do a top 20 just yet because that's basically all of them. But in the future, we will see where this one lands, but I would put it probably at like 18 out of 25 at this current time, I think, but I don't know. I have now read it, and I can now say that I've read it, so I'm getting through. I like his older works. I can see what people talk about now, about like his early days versus, I mean, now, like basically pre-accident and post-accident, but I don't necessarily have a lot of the same criticisms that people do, especially because these days he's not really like drugged out and wild, so I don't know. It's interesting to see what he was producing during those days, just because I've heard so much about like his drug habits before he got himself cleaned up or whatever, but it is definitely interesting to see where he was back in those days. But yeah, this book for me just really wasn't ultimately my favorite Stephen King book. The next book that I finished this month was called Trespassing Across America by Ken Elgunas, and it's just about how he was walking along the Keystone Pipeline and he basically was just crossing over everyone's farmland, and it was like a highly illegal hike that he was doing because he was just trespassing across everybody's property. But I actually kind of liked this book. I'm a little bit of a traveler myself, so I have been around America. I've been to 33 of the 50 states, so I've been almost to all of them, but he went through a lot of places that I have been before, so there was a lot of personal connections that I was just making when I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I was in that state, or oh yeah, I know what you're talking about with the Midwest, or all of that, plus my little time in New Zealand. Like, it was just definitely speaking to the travel bug in me. But this book also reminded me a lot of one of my friends named Daniel Troya, who's got a YouTube channel called The Travelin' Dude, which I'll have linked down in the description box. But a few years ago, he did like a bike trip around America where he left with no money, and he was just trying to rely on the goodness of the people that he met. And he actually made a little documentary about it called We're All in This Together, which I think he has a trailer up on his channel as well, which I'll link to. But his film is actually winning some like indie film awards, and I think it's totally well deserved. I was actually able to be there when he initially did like a release for it at one of the local theaters back in Monterey. So I definitely liked it for that purpose as well, just because I'm so proud of Daniel and what he did on that trip. And a lot of what Ken was doing in this book is reminiscent to me of what Daniel was trying to do, about just raising certain awarenesses around certain things. This one had more of a focus on global warming, and Daniel's had more of a focus on homelessness. But I just enjoy travel anecdotes like that, and how these trips and these experiences have changed the lives of the people who went through them. Just because, as I said, I'm a traveler myself, and I have a lot of those experiences that I can think back on for myself. The next book that I read this month is my last Stephen King book of the month, and that was The Dead Zone, which I also gave a 4 out of 5. This book was actually so much different than what I thought it was gonna be, because I do try to go into books as blind as possible. I thought that this one was about like someone who died, and then we went to the other side with them, and like that was the dead zone. But that's not what this book is about at all. It's about psychic abilities and a man who was in a coma who woke up and had these abilities, and the dead zone was like the part of his brain that brought in all of these new abilities that he didn't have beforehand. I enjoyed this book. I mean, I've heard a lot about this book. There's obviously the movie and the TV show. I've heard the TV show is pretty good. I may have to check them both out, but there were some things in this book that I also didn't like, especially like right at the beginning, which if you are named Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative and you haven't read this book, then if you do read this book, just skip the prologue because you're not gonna like it. But yeah, it was an interesting book, definitely a lot different, as I said, than I thought it was gonna be. A lot of religious factors went into this one, and that's something that I'm noticing with Stephen King's earlier works, especially with things like Carrie, is that he just has very crazy religious people that are in it, and there's definitely a lot about religion and politics. It's a very political book as well, which I wasn't really expecting, because like I said, I thought it was going to be taking place in some like dead world, but I was completely wrong about that. So there's another Stephen King book down in the books for me, which I don't know, like I said, I think I'm at 25 of his now, and he's at I think 67, so I'm working on it. But like I'm a third of the way through his entire works, which is crazy because I don't think I've read that many books by one author before. But the more I get into him, the more I'm honestly inspired by him, because he is such an incredible and thorough author, and it's like every book, while it may have similarities to his other books, or while he might make connections to his bigger verse through other books, I just think that he has such an ability to write in so many different genres and so many different avenues, and it's just one of the reasons I think he's as successful as he is today. And I'm happy that I'm finally getting into his works, because I was always too afraid to before, but now the more I get into it, the more I'm actually just very interested in how he constructs these novels, because again, with The Dead Zone, as with most of his books, it's very character driven and very gripping, and I'm definitely happy that I have finally gotten through this one, especially because I was completely wrong about what it was about. And the last book that I finished this month was called American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, which I gave like a 2.5 out of 5. I'm still trying to decide if I want to leave it at that rating. I might give it a little bit higher of a rating. This book was so grotesque and so disgusting, and so oh my gosh, I almost puked so many times reading this book. I've seen the movie, and so this book was actually gifted to me by Evie from She Was Only Evie, because I have some of my little book to movie comparison videos on this channel, and she offered me a few different books to choose from in order to do another one. So this was the one that I had chosen just because I had seen the movie before and I had heard about the book, but I really did not know what I was like really getting myself into at all. So I don't even want to hold it anymore. It's like a book that I actually had to like look up author interviews while I was reading it, because I was like, what were you going through? What were you thinking? What was happening in your life that made you want to create this book? I have some respect, I guess, from his answers. I was reading a 25th anniversary interview from him, but it's just, I don't know, like there's things about it that I understand what he was trying to do and what he was trying to say, and how it's some sort of commentary on like Wall Street and the rich man and all of this stuff, but I don't know, it just was a little grotesque for me, and I don't think it'll be a book that I ever pick up again, but it could be one that I end up giving a higher rating later on. And that is going to take care of all of the books that I read in August. It was actually a very good reading month for me, especially because this year has not had a lot of good reading months for me. I am ahead now on my book goal of the year and my page read goal of the year, so I'm happy for that. I will be carrying on with my Stephen King binge moving into September. I'm already about halfway through The Talisman, which is a book he wrote with Peter Straub, and I'll see what else I can get out of him from the rest of this month. But what was your guys' August reading month like? Did you have any books that you loved, or some books that maybe you didn't? Any books that made you want to vomit? Because I hope not. Have you read American Psycho? Because I would love to hear other people's opinions on that. I was originally debating whether or not I actually wanted to not do the book to movie comparison for that book anymore, but I just might, because I think I just need to share all my thoughts just in general. But let me know how your reading months were, what books you loved, what books you didn't, what books you're planning on reading. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, or if you want to, shout it off down in those comments. And while you are there, if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you gave it a little thumbs up, as well as potentially considered pressing on that little subscribe button to join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sometimes on Sundays for bookish and writerly and entertainment-y-esque content just like this. In the meantime, I hope you all have a day just as beautiful as you, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!